Okay, we're going to hear feedback from the small groups right now. And if you've been looking at the theme of my moderating today, it follows on the last shall be first and the first shall be last. So we'll start with group 4. I think if everybody comes up and uses this mic, because Jennifer will then be able to hear. And Jennifer's on the, is listening to our feedback.
Thank you, Wendy. I'm Sharon Woodrow. I'm from Trinity United in Cannington, and I volunteered to take our notes, so I hope I can read my notes. Our conversation went kind of around, so I have a lot of just notes, and I hope you can translate or ask questions of us later. We found the session to be very heavy. It was a lot to take in. Some wished that we had handouts to make notes on because they didn't come prepared to write. Satorical, what does it mean? Does it mean salvation? The hymns were a wonderful part of it. What are we going to do with this great information? What action have we been doing, and what have we to do? There are new people arriving in the country, and how are we responding? The National Church plans for 10 more United Churches to accommodate refugees. What does the United Church mean to these refugees? Someone belongs to the Canadian Women for Women in Afghanistan and Amnesty International and feels that the church needs to be part of this. It was great to be here, but what are we going to do with all this information? And how do we end the word mission? The United Church needs to focus with fewer people and pulpit vacancies, and how are we addressing all of this? We need direction. Jesus had direction, and people knew what his direction was. Okay, there was more discussion on the hymns and the reflection on the hymns, and it was felt that maybe a break between the hymns with a reflection or a focus on them might have been helpful, but the hymns were really enjoyed. It was suggested that thoughts be reflected or inserted into the hymns. And some of us would have liked to hear more verses. Some of the people in our group weren't necessarily familiar with United Church hymns and didn't know the hymns, so would have liked to hear more of them. The voices were chosen, but with the reasons not necessarily explained. We had to kind of decipher that ourselves. We invite new people, not knowing what or why they want to come. It was talked about whether or not this whole thing would be recorded, because apparently the people that were up here on the panel weren't necessarily able to hear Jennifer's presentation, so it is hoped that her words will be available either in a written form or in the video. Would have liked to hear more from Curve Lake, especially from Shelley and Rodney. It's a balancing act, not necessarily knowing what the First Nations need or want. All religions have the same basis, and that was something we discussed a fair bit about. We don't necessarily understand all of the others, but we are all God-driven. Mark Street in Peterborough had an interfaith group meeting where they decided that we all worship the same God. Maybe not the same way, but we do have the same God. Are we going to be worshiping the same God 10 years from now that we worshiped 10 years ago? We talked about going to India and Haiti and the different religions and the way that those work there. Rabbis and imams, how they can connect and meet together and share common things. Does one person speak for all, or do all speak for one? Or does one speak for all, or do all speak for everyone else? And that was around communist countries. The people gathering around the cenotaph on Remembrance Day, what are they remembering? We didn't talk about anti-Semitic or agree with what is going on about that. I think that's it for number 4. Is there anyone else who wants to add anything else into my notes?
Thanks, Wendy. I'm going to just follow Sharon's good example and share with you some of the comments that were made in our group. So basically, we just got to question number 1, discussion being mostly on the word mission. Some of us feel that there's a great gap taking and looking at all of the complexities and the details. There is a great gap between us as lay leaders or non-lay leaders, between us and the congregations. And how do we talk about these things with and in our congregations? That was an important question for the group. It feels daunting sometimes. The example given was one of white privilege, where a particular person wanted to really discuss it with the congregation. However, there was some trepidation that was not a good thing to do, and there would be, what's the word? Senior moment? Backlash, yes. So I think many of us here can probably identify with that. Some in the group felt that, yes, the word mission could be redeemed. Some felt that they really would like to retain the word mission. For those who want to do away with it, what is the alternative? Do we have an alternative? There's one congregation that says to its minister, if you want to change a word, go ahead and do it. If you want to change the name of a committee, go ahead and do it. They don't get into all the discussions around that. So reappropriating the word mission, and apparently as Jennifer spoke, there was a meeting at General Council last week where the word mission was discussed, and so there are some changes and some resources being prepared to share with us in congregations. Definitions change over the years. Listen to those who we are trying to convert. Maybe they have something to teach us. Another sharing was words of hymns being loaded. I had never really thought about that. Mission is part of the UCW's mandate. I like the definition of Creator God because it does not involve any gender. Toss the word mission out was another contribution. And someone reported that in her naivety many years ago, how shocked she was when she realized that the word mission was also used by the military industrial complex. And so every time she sings a hymn with the word mission in it, those images come to mind. We were just moving into question number 2. Well, what do we do with all this? So because we ran out of time, our next step for this group is to meet during the winter months and to discuss the gap between congregations and things that we have spoken about today. That's it. Thank you.
Our group struggled with the negative baggage associated with mission, Wondered if the word outreach or reaching out was a good substitute, but they weren't sure of that. I think the theme that ran through our group was around deep listening, if I can use that phraseology, intentionally listening. That seems to be the key to interfaith, interreligious dialogue and the practice of mission in the modern world. There was concern in our group about the fact that the church has abandoned, by and large, it's the younger generation, and are somewhat anxious and in despair about how to make a connection to grandchildren, children that never darken the door of the church, and are they to be the subject or the object of mission. A question was asked whether the fact that Christianity is doing so well in what we in the first world called the third world is because of the holdover of colonial language which was used to express our theology. I think I'll summarize it with that.
Yeah, I took a good amount of notes too, and I'm going to follow the same format as the first two. And I'll try not to minimize the comments that were made because, we only have a limited amount of time. But we went around, talked about impressions and reflections, and then we went around to talk about suggestions on how to move forward. So in the reflective piece, we were talking about bringing us back to account every day. How do we communicate the urgency of this work? We've come so far, but there's still such a long way to go. Some congregations have really done a lot, and some are still quite struggling. Another opportunity to reflect here, and that was really appreciated. But we want to know who's listening, and how do we respond? There are different perspectives, concerns of the community, the how, when there's lots of resistance to that change. Mission, again, is a problematic word, and that's a theme that seems to be coming up. But it can be giving and receiving. So trying not to demonize the word, or I guess we're too hung up on it, I don't know. But that certainly is a conversation in itself. Lots of appreciation for this thinking and articulating, and how can we really get over these humps that we're at. Lots of food for thought today. We need to prioritize the language and the challenges in that language in moving forward. Who has done better? How have they done better? And how do we follow Christ today? Congregation has been approached by some clergy, and there's still a lot of resistance, even particularly regarding the remit, the Indigenous remit, and there's some real struggle there in some places. There's the colonization struggle, like even the recognition that that there is that exists still in practice, if not an understanding of it's embedded in a mentality with white privilege and so on, without even an understanding of that existence. So the mission and the language again is certainly something we're trying to wrap our heads around. Regarding going forward, certainly peace in the world is a common goal. We have to learn how to work together, build bridges. There's a lot of events going on, or an increasing amount of events to help facilitate those open discussions. Sometimes you have to ask your congregation. Some clergy are here on their own, and some just suggested, actually, can't do this, I'm going here. And so everybody in that particular group that was supposed to meet today are here. listen to those stories, even though they're uncomfortable, and you can't, even though you can't understand everything, that discomfort is, I'll give you a quick teaching about our medicine wheel, the 4 quadrants of the medicine wheel, and there are stages and lots of teachings in there. One teaching is the stages of our growth. There's childhood, adolescence, adulthood, and being an elder. I do a lot of facilitating framework development using a medicine wheel. To get from one quadrant to another often takes chaos. And it's like, I call it a rocket ship when I'm talking to kids. What is the rocket ship that's going to take you from one quadrant to the next? So we're kind of in that stage of chaos. And it's okay to be there. You don't live there. You use it to launch yourself. So yeah, the education piece, opportunities through like Abraham Festival and making your own events to do that, history and colonialism or all of those impacts. People are often quick to see the differences in each other, and is there a way that we can find our common ground? That's kind of alluded to as well in the national strategy. So that common ground is what you build on. That's where I'm starting in special education. What's the strength that you build on? Understanding how you work in othering people. What are you guilty of? Are you guilty of something and when you're othering people? So that's a reflection you can do. And Canadians are still ahead of the game, I guess, in the rest of the world. So we can build on that. Reaching out to those on the periphery of your community, of your society, and doing the dinners, finding ways to communicate, understand those perspectives, and recognize what you know or did of the past. For example, an educator talked about the crafts she used to do as an educator that were not really tied to teachings or tied to the Indigenous way of being. And how would you go forward from that? How far we've come from that, but we're still got quite a ways to go. I gave the conversation of myself, and talking, if you're looking for language and how to approach your community in your congregation, understand that the Indian Act really kind of kept us at the gate while the rest of Canada were encouraged to move ahead economically, to build their generational wealth. If you're on a piece of property that is generations old or can be generations old, we weren't allowed that. We were kept on this little piece of property, but there are lots of rules to that. We didn't get Canadian citizenship till 1960. We weren't Canadians. My dad often starts his introduction of himself saying, I wasn't born a Canadian. We weren't given the Canadian citizenship or the right to vote till 1960. So we were held back a lot of stuff. We weren't even people till mid-50s. Indian Act said a person is someone other than an Indian. So when you're held back at the gate like that, and you see you're out of the gate and you go, whoa, where's my land? Where's my relationship to my land? It's not even like, where's my ownership of my land? Where's the relationship to the land I know? That's one understanding. Why am I the first person on both sides of my family to be in a PhD program? How much further out of the gate we are. I've taken up enough of your time. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I appreciate hearing back from the small groups, particularly as you're engaging with the question of what you've heard and what do you do with what you've heard and what your conversations have brought about. I also want to say thank you to the 4 co-presenters for the additional depth and experiences and perspectives that you offered. It does take all of us to work together on these questions, engage in these conversations. I particularly appreciate the kind of questions or the wrestling of how do we continue to live in the world as disciples? How do we work for justice and peace together with other folks? And how do we continue to learn to share our good news as disciples of Christ while still respecting the other faiths and traditions that others are part of? And so I think those are really key questions for all of us to continue to wrestle with. So thank you again for thoughtfully engaging with all of this morning.
Hi, Jennifer. It's Aruna Alexander. I'm just, it seems that many are struggling with the issue of the gap between what we talk about as leaders, both lay leaders and non-lay leaders, the gap between us and congregations and discussing these issues there. I'm just wondering at the national level, because you're embedded in working together for the common good, how do you see this working itself out on the ground, where congregations are concerned? Am I articulating this correctly?
So I think one of the things that we're aware of with the national churches is the shared work and responsibility, and sometimes different responsibilities the national church has in relation to communities of faith and that regional councils have. And so we want to continue to partner around that work. In terms of kind of exploring and wrestling with the idea of mission and our theologies and histories around it, one of the directions that the working group, one of the recommendations the working group made to the General Council Executive and that was passed was that resources really be developed that will be accessible to local communities of faith for people to kind of pick up. And part of that is thinking through the kind of format and presentation of those kinds of resources so that they're, this may sound trivial, but it's not, so that they're not really text heavy, so that there's a multiple kind of ways of engaging. Maybe we'll have some more illustrations. And I mean, this is, the report back from small groups is helpful because I think the question of, so what do we do with this then, is one that we would want to incorporate into these kinds of resources and potentially offer some suggestions for people to think about and kind of work out in their own context. So I think that, you know, that's what we can certainly take into account and are trying to take into account as we think about how best to engage local communities of faith.
Okay, thank you.
I think unless there's a burning question, I just want to thank Jennifer again for being here today through Zoom when I know you're not feeling as at your best, and we really appreciate your presentation to us.